All right, we are good to go. Good luck, guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are here for the case of United States versus Blake Crosby. My name is Judge Heikens. Could I get appearances from both sides?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Tahj Burnett. Together, I'm joined by my co-counsel, Mr. Benjamin Sweatler.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Today, we'll be representing the state, and we'll be joined by co-counsel by Agent Debnath.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Good evening. Get appearances from the defense, please.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Debnath, and today I'm joined by my co-counsel, Mr. Drew Ashlock.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
And together we represent our client, Mr. Blake Crosby.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, sir. Is there anything from the government that we need to take up right now?
Just a few pretrial matters, Your Honor. First, we'd like to invoke Rule 603, instructive of pre-swearing in of all witnesses.
That's granted.
All right, and Your Honor, we'd also like to ask your preferences for movement about your courtroom, since we've never been here before. Should we ask permission before we approach the bench, the jury, yourself?
In general, my view is this is your courtroom, cramped though as it is, you can do whatever you need to do. I would ask that if you're going to go anywhere near the jury, you ask permission to do that. But since we don't have a bailiff, if you have anything you need to hand to the court, you just hand it to me directly. So again, other than approaching the jury, feel free to do whatever you need to do without asking permission.
Noted, Your Honor. And finally, Your Honor, I'd just like to ask, would you prefer that we direct our statements, the witnesses direct their testimony to yourself, to the jury, or both?
The jury.
With that, Your Honor, we've got no more pre-trial matters and we're ready to begin with opening statements.
Terrific. Guns?
Yes, Your Honor, just one matter to address.
Of course.
Both parties have agreed before this trial that all objections have been waived to Exhibit 18. It's an affidavit of another witness in this case. So the defense moves to enter Exhibit 18 at this time. May I approach with a copy?
Any objection to that from the government?
No, Your Honor.
All right, that's great.
Here you are, Your Honor.
Thank you. So this is Exhibit 18?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 18 is received.
With that, Your Honor, the defense is ready to go.
State, I guess the government, you can open when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, Ms. Debnath, members of the jury. The training, the threats, and the time. It's July 4th of 2022. And in Rittenhouse Square, right here in Philadelphia, a presidential candidate is giving a speech to thousands of his supporters. Some people are holding flags. Some are holding signs. But for just one person, he's holding a gun. Members of the jury, today you'll learn that hundreds of yards away on a rooftop of a hotel, the defendant, Blake Crosby, is peering down the scope of a sniper. Seconds later, that presidential candidate falls to the ground. And for the people in the audience, it's terrifying. But for the defendant, Blake Crosby, it's exactly what he had planned. And members of the jury, that plan is why we're here today. As the prosecution, we hold the burden of proof in today's case. It's our job to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, the man sitting in that chair murdered Senator Capello, and that he did so intentionally and deliberately. So members of the jury, throughout today's trial, and to sit and listen to the evidence, I want you to focus on three facts: the defendant's training, the defendant's threats to the senator, and the timing of the crime. So first, the defendant's training. Because you're going to learn today that the hotel rooftop that shot was fired from was over 600 yards away. The shooter only fired a single bullet and hit Senator Capello square in the face. You're going to learn that not just anybody could make a shot like that. They would need to be skilled, experienced. And today you're going to hear that the defendant is the only person in the city of Philadelphia who could have made a shot like that. You're going to hear from the defendant himself that he was a U.S. Army trained sniper, that he held world records for the longest bullseye in the world, and that he consistently hit shots twice as far away as Mr. Capello. So you might be asking yourself, why would the defendant use that training to shoot that senator? Well, today you'll learn that he was no secret what he thought of Senator Capello. You're going to hear that in the months leading up to that shooting, the defendant, Blake Crosby, had made death threats to that senator. Thomas Capello is a threat to everyone in the United States. That as long as Thomas Capello was alive, none of us would be safe. And members of the jury, he was the only person who could do what he thought needed to be done. Which brings us to the timing. Because today you're going to learn that on that rooftop of the Sonesta Hotel was a cigarette that had the defendant's DNA, fingerprints, and gunshot residue from the murder. You're going to learn that a hotel receptionist who was at that hotel on the day of the crime saw a single person dressed in all black, carrying a bag with a gun in it, walking up to that same rooftop an hour before Mr. Capello was shot. Members of the jury, throughout today's trial, I want you to think about the training, the timing, and the threats. And at the end of today's trial, I'll stand before you again and ask you to find the only verdict consistent with the evidence. Find the defendant, Blake Crosby, guilty. Thank you.
Counsel? Spence, you know whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, Mr. Burnett, members of the jury. When they couldn't stop the assassin, they started making assumptions. Members of the jury, Mr. Burnett got up here just now, and he told you a lot about the evidence they'll find in this case. And there's a witness who he was talking about in his opening statement who's going to testify to that evidence. Agent DeVico. Told you about how Agent DeVico found the threats, found the timing, but members of the jury, what they didn't tell you is what this case meant for that same agent's career. So I want to take us back to July 4th of 2022. Agent DeVico was standing in the crowd at that same rally when suddenly a gunshot rings out over his head. He reaches for his weapon, but by the time that he turns around, it's too late. The senator is already lying dead in that stage. In that moment, the pressures of his job come crashing down. Because he was the one in charge of that security team. He was the one overseeing more than 100 officers. He was the one standing right in front of that podium, armed and at the ready. So when he failed at his job, he was desperate to find someone to blame. So while the government might tell you today about our client's training, the threats, and the timing, what they didn't tell you is that they failed to run a thorough investigation. Members of the jury, the evidence will show that when they couldn't stop that assassin, they started making assumptions. And that's a problem for the government. Because today, they have a burden of proof, a burden they can't meet with assumptions, they have to meet it with facts and evidence. They have to prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that our client, Mr. Crosby, is the person who intentionally shot and killed Mr. Capel. But they're not gonna meet that burden today because of two simple things. First, the assumptions the government made. And second, why they made them. So I want to start with that first fact, members of the jury. What do we know about the assumptions that the government made in this case? Well, we're going to hear a lot about those assumptions over the duration of this trial, but we actually heard a bit about them just now in Mr. Burnett's opening. See, we learned today, members of the jury, that the government assumed Mr. Crosby was dangerous because of his training as a sniper. But what we'll see today, members of the jury, is that Mr. Crosby hasn't touched a sniper gun in years. We also heard from Mr. Burnett that the government assumed Mr. Crosby was dangerous because of what he called a threat. And Mr. Burnett, he didn't show you this tweet, members of the jury, but I will. Because over the course of this trial, we're going to get a chance to take a look at what Mr. Crosby actually said. What we'll learn is that senator, that political candidate, he was receiving threats far worse than this Twitter post. Threats from people who the government won't be able to name in trial today. And there was one last assumption Mr. Burnett mentioned in his opening statement. They assumed that the timing placed Mr. Crosby at the scene of action. Well, members of the jury, what we'll learn today is that the government's eyewitness never actually saw Mr. Crosby on that roof at the time of the murder. So at this point, we've got to be asking ourselves, members of the jury, why would the government make all of those assumptions? Well, that brings us to our second fact. And it brings us straight to the government's star witness. See, Agent DeVico is going to take that stand. And we're going to learn that this case, it was his first homicide investigation ever. A homicide investigation into a person who died under his watch. Members of the jury, we're going to learn that with the public eye bearing down on him, the pressure would just, it got to be too much. Look, members of the jury, I want to acknowledge that what happened to Mr. Capello is a tragedy. And in no way are we saying that Agent DeVico is somehow responsible now. What we are saying now is that the law in this country is clear. Just because the government couldn't stop that assassin doesn't mean they can start making assumptions. That's why at the end of this trial, I'm going to come before you again. And I'll ask that you find Mr. Crosby not guilty. Thank you for your time.
Counsel? Is there anything we need to address before the government calls its first witness?
Nothing from the prosecution, Your Honor.
Not from the defense, Your Honor.
The government, you may call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The government calls Agent DeVico.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Counsel, you can start whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Morgan DeVico.
What do you do for a living, Mr. DeVico?
I'm a Secret Service agent. I'm in charge of the protection unit for the Secret Service. We're essentially in charge of making sure that political candidates stay safe.
Sir, were you working as for the Secret Service on July 4th of last year?
I was.
And what were you doing?
I was in charge of protecting a presidential candidate, a U.S. Senator, Mr. Thomas Capel.
And what happened while you were protecting Senator Capel?
At 1:47 p.m. on July 4th, 2022, Mr. Capel was shot. sniper bullet shot him in the forehead, and Mr. Capello died.
And Agent, I want to talk about what your agency did after Mr. Capello was shot.
Okay.
What's the first step you take when something like that happens?
When something like that happens, we take two steps. We want to find where the bullet came from, and we want to find who actually fired the bullet.
Then, sir, I want to start with that first step, where the bullet might have came from. What did you find?
Well, we turned to forensics. We sent the body to our forensics team with the FBI, and they were able to determine the trajectory of the bullet entering his skull, the size of the bullet hole, and using that information, they were actually able to determine a location where the bullet most likely came from.
Sir, what was that location?
400 to 800 yards north of the Rittenhouse Square here in Philadelphia.
Sir, could you tell us if there were any buildings within that 400 to 800 range?
There were actually two buildings that fit the profile, two hotels.
And sir, did you investigate both of those hotels yourself?
Objection, Your Honor, misstating the evidence, if I may be heard.
Sure.
Your Honor, just a moment ago, this witness stated that there were two buildings that fit the profile of that description they gave. Your Honor, that's incorrect. There's actually a forensic report in evidence already as Exhibit 16 that states it was two rooftops and rather more buildings that fit that description. That distinction is important.
This all strikes me as a matter for cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. So we finished with your answer.
Right, so one of the hotels, we actually found physical evidence on one of the rooftops of that hotel.
So would you recognize that physical evidence if I showed it to you today?
I certainly would.
Your Honor, I'm approaching opposing counsel with what's been pre-marked as exhibits 5 and 7, a bullet and a cigarette. Motion first to approach the witness with the same. Agent, what did I just hand you?
So these are the pieces of evidence that I was able to retrieve from the hotel that we investigated. This is a blue sniper rifle bullet. And this was a cigarette that we retrieved a few feet away from the sniper rifle bullet on that rooftop.
Do those two bullets and cigarettes, they look the same to you?
Looks the same as one I collected.
Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution offers those two exhibits in evidence, 5 and 7.
No objection at this time, Your Honor.
Okay, 5 and 7 are received.
So, sir, I want to start with that bullet you've got there right in front.
Okay,
What can your forensics team tell us about the bullet?
so we sent it into the lab and we were able to determine that this bullet, a blue NATO cartridge, was the same type of bullet that was lodged into the forehead of Senator Capello. It's the same bullet.
So were you able to find any fingerprints or DNA on that bullet?
Fingerprints and DNA on the bullet, but we were able to turn to the forensics for the cigarette that was right next to the bullet at the time.
What can you tell us about that cigarette?
So we sent this cigarette into the lab because of the proximity to the bullet. And what our forensics team determined was that there was gunshot residue on the cigarette.
What is gunshot residue?
So essentially, when a firearm when it's a bullet is shot out of the firearm, particles are emitted from the firearm, and those they can land on objects that are within 5 or so feet from the firearm at the time of the shooting.
So, sir, was there anything else you found on that cigarette that might have helped in your investigation?
Yeah, it wasn't just covered in gunshot residue. We found forensic evidence on this cigarette. We found fingerprints and DNA evidence as well.
Sir, how sure was the Secret Service that that DNA evidence was accurate?
The DNA evidence was a 1 in 6.2 billion match to Blake Crosby.
And so what did you do after you realized that match?
Well, naturally, we wanted to determine if Blake Crosby was a suspect. So again, we turned to the forensics and we decided to investigate Mr. Crosby further.
Did you find any record of Mr. Crosby's background?
We actually did. We looked into his background and we found records of his military history.
Sir, would you recognize that military history if I showed it to you today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, I'm approaching opposing counsel with what's been redacted copy of something that's exhibit 14. We've redacted portions for their prejudicial value. We're only going to be using the first 2 paragraphs.
Just so the record is clear, the government has redacted, the redactions were performed by the government?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
Permission to approach the witness. And sir, what did I just hand you?
This is a record of the military service, armed forces of the United States for Blake Crosby.
And what did this document tell you about the defendant?
Well, details the defendant's military history. Says that he was a sniper in the Army for 8 years, and that he was not just any sniper. It says here he won all Army sniper competitions 4 times and holds a record for the longest yet.
Agent, after you read this information about the defendant, did your group ever interview?
We did. We called him in and we interviewed him.
Sir, did you
Can
ever?
I just ask a clarification? Has this been admitted?
Your Honor, I can admit it right.
Are there any objections to admitting the redacted version?
No objection to that redacted version, Your Honor.
So exhibit 14 as redacted.
Of course, Your Honor. Sir, what did you do after you read this information from the document?
Well, we interviewed him. We wanted to get the information from him and see what he had to say.
And sir, during that interview, did you ever ask the defendant whether or not he'd ever been on a rooftop on the July 4th weekend?
We actually showed him this cigarette. We didn't tell him about the fingerprints and the DNA at first. We said, what is your explanation for this gunshot residue? When he said, I've never seen this cigarette before. He said he didn't smoke it. He said he had never been on the rooftop to smoke that cigarette. That's what he told me at first.
So you said that's what he told you at first. Did something change?
Then we showed him the fingerprints. Then we showed him the DNA evidence. And during our interview, the defendant admitted he lied. He admitted that he actually was on that rooftop and that this was a cigarette.
So did you ever speak with the hotel receptionist for the hotel he was on top of?
We did. We received a call from the hotel clerk.
Did that hotel clerk ever tell you anything about Mr. Crosby's whereabouts?
Yes, that hotel clerk had information about Mr. Crosby. That hotel clerk told us that just moments before the shooting, around 12:45 or so, the hotel clerk.
Objection, Your Honor, as to hearsay.
Why isn't this for certain?
Your Honor, this is actually information that is contained in reports that this detective used to reach his conclusion. It's not being used for the truth. It's going towards his investigation and why he believed he was a suspect.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Please.
Your Honor, this is in fact going toward the truth of the matter asserted. The witness didn't get a chance to quite finish his statement, but I believe this direction it was going in was that the eyewitness claims to have identified Mr. Crosby going up to that roof on July 4th. Goes directly to him.
Yeah, counsel, it sure sounded to me from your opening statement like you were using this for the truth of the matter asserted. So why is this not good?
Your Honor, furthermore, if you think of one of the pretrial stipulations, number 17, it states that if ever.
You have a copy of that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can give you this.
No, I was excited. I know you have. If you have a copy, that'd be great.
Your Honor, I've got a copy here.
Wonderful, thank you, yes. Okay, just want to make sure we're all looking at the same thing.
Of course, Your Honor. So if you head to the pretrial rules, specifically number 17.
Okay.
Your Honor, it states that if Harper Edwards does not testify at trial, the parties waive all objections to the admissibility of Exhibit 17, Mr. Edwards' statement. Mr. Edwards is that hotel receptionist, so any of the statements contained within that document, they're not hearsay. We've already waived objections.
May I be heard to that, Your Honor?
Please.
Your Honor, we've waived objections to the document itself, and that allows Mr. Burnett to admit that document into evidence. But to go on to cite specific conversations that this agent had with that witness, that's hearsay being offered for the truth.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree, Mr. Bennett. I read this to say, if you want to admit Exhibit 17, you can do that. But it seems to me that this individual statements to this person are a separate category of statements that are not covered by the stipulation, so I'm going to sustain the objection.
Sure, Your Honor.
Your Honor, motion to strike that portion of the witness's answer.
It was great.
Detective, rather Agent DeVico, would you recognize a copy of the hotel receptionist statement if I gave it to you today?
I would, I didn't do that information.
Your Honor, we're approaching opposing counsel with Exhibit 17. And approaching the witness with the same.
Appreciate it.
Sir, what did I just hand you?
This is the affidavit of that hotel clerk, Harper Edwards.
Does it appear to be a fair and accurate copy?
It looks like it.
And Your Honor, at this time, we'd offer to move Exhibit 17 into evidence pursuant to that stipulation.
It will be admitted.
So, sir, could you tell us what that hotel receptionist told you about Mr. Crosby's whereabouts?
Harper Edwards says that they saw a person wearing all black, black baseball cap, sunglasses on the shirt, and a backpack. Didn't recognize the person, but that person was attempting to access the hotel rooftop.
And sir, I want to talk about why Mr. Crosby might have done this. As part of your investigation, did you ever research the social media of this witness?
I did. It's part of my job to look into social media, see if there's any motive, any social media posts that have been made by Mr. Crosby.
And did he make any social media posts in the months before that shooting?
He did. One in April that stood out to us, and one on the day of the shooting, July 5th.
Would you recognize some copies of those posts if I showed them to you today?
I absolutely would.
Your Honor, at this time, we're approaching opposing counsel with exhibits 12 and 13. And approaching the witness with the same. Sir, what did I just say?
These are the tweets posted by Blake Crosby.
They appear to be fair and accurate copies.
Looks the same as when I saw them the first time.
Your Honor, at this time, we offer exhibits 12 and 13 in chat.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, 12 and 13 be received.
Agent, can you read those posts for us?
Blake Crosby says that Thomas R. Capello is a threat to every person in this country. As long as he is alive, none of us are safe. He said it's time for the Patriots.
Thank you for your time, Agent. Your Honor, I've got no further questions. And permission to publish those exhibits to the jury?
And counsel, before you begin your thoughts, I'll give you back your stipulations.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Mr. Burnett, you can actually leave those exhibits up there. I'd appreciate that.
All of them?
We'll see what we use. Yes.
Of course.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Good afternoon, Agent.
Good afternoon.
So you'd agree with me that it's important to run a thorough investigation, right?
Of course, collect physical evidence, conduct forensic tests.
You'd agree with me it's important not to make any assumptions in that investigation, right?
Right, you want to make sure you can uncover as much evidence as possible to turn over all stones.
So you'd agree with me that it's important you have a complete investigation, isn't that right?
To follow all leads and collect any evidence you can find, yes.
Sir, where's the murder weapon that you claim Mr. Crosby used in this case?
We actually have a part of the sniper weapon, ma'am.
Sorry, you're telling us that you have a part of the murder weapon that was used in this case?
Yes, ma'am, that's true.
Okay, well, let's discuss that part of a sniper rifle that you're telling us about today.
Okay.
Sir, you found that part of a sniper rifle inside a trash can, right?
Right, we actually interviewed the defendant. They said that they went to a restaurant. We searched the restaurant and there we found a trigger shield to a sniper rifle.
You found that trigger shield in a trash can at a local cleaners. Do I have that right?
Right, that's the restaurant that the defendant told us they visited after the shooting.
Now, sir, you're telling us that that trigger shield, it was a part of the murder weapon used in this case? Do I have that right?
A sniper rifle, ma'am, it's a sniper rifle part. It's a trigger shield to a sniper rifle.
Sir, I'm going to direct you back to my question. Is it your testimony that trigger bar was a part of the murder weapon used in this case? Yes or no?
We know for a fact that it's part of a sniper rifle and that a sniper rifle bullet was used to kill the senator.
So you know that it's part of a sniper rifle, sir, but there's a reason you can't tell this jury it was a part of the murder weapon used in this case, isn't it?
We do not have the entire sniper rifle. It's our understanding that it was disassembled into parts. We have one of those parts.
In fact, sir, you tested that piece of that sniper rifle for gunshot risk, didn't you?
We tested every piece of evidence we collected, yes.
So that includes that shield?
Right, the trigger shield, it would be on the underside of the gun.
So when you tested that trigger shield for gunshot residue, you found that it tested negative, didn't you?
Right, the trigger shield is on the underside of the trigger. The gunshot residue, it comes out from the front of the gun, ma'am.
So you're telling me that the trigger shield just on the bottom of that gun, that you're claiming was a part of the murder weapon, in this case, it tested negative for any gunshot residue at all?
Right, it's what's on the bottom underside of the gun. The gunshot residue is what comes out of the tip of the gun, where the bullet actually comes out.
Let's discuss what else we do or don't know about that trigger shield.
Okay.
Because, well, you never tested that trigger shield for fingerprints, did you?
We tested every piece of evidence that we collected. There were no fingerprints on the trigger shield.
So you're telling us you tested that trigger shield for fingerprints, you didn't find Mr. Crosby's fingerprints on that trigger shield, did you, sir?
No, no one's fingerprints were on that trigger.
You didn't find any of his skin cells?
No skin cells, ma'am, no.
You didn't find any hair follicles?
No hair follicles.
So, sir, what I'm hearing is that you don't have a single piece of forensic evidence tying Mr. Crosby to that piece, trigger shield that you're telling us about today. Do I have that right?
Ma'am, we do have forensic evidence tying back to Mr. Crosby.
Okay, let's discuss that forensic evidence. Sir, is it all right if I approach and grab that cigarette from you?
Go right ahead.
So you were telling us about this cigarette in your earlier conversation, right?
That's right.
You told us, well, this was Mr. Crosby's cigarette, isn't that right?
That's not what Mr. Crosby told us at first, but when presented with evidence, Mr. Crosby admitted to lying and then admitted it was his cigarette, yes.
So we can agree that this cigarette, it's not a murder weapon, right?
No, it was just next to the sniper bullet.
You're telling us it was next to that sniper bullet, sir. This cigarette, it doesn't tell you when this cigarette was smoked, right?
Right, all we know is that there was gunshot residue on the cigarette.
So this cigarette, it doesn't tell you that Mr. Crosby was on that roof on July 4th, does it?
No, just that the cigarette was there when the gun was fired.
Sir, was that a yes to my question?
We cannot tell that question specifically, no, just that it was there when the gun was fired.
So this cigarette, it can't tell us when Mr. Crosby was on that roof. Sir, can it tell us that Mr. Crosby fired a sniper rifle to kill a presidential candidate?
No, ma'am, just that there was gunshot residue on it. It indicates that the gun was fired in the presence of the cigarette.
But what this cigarette can tell us is that, well, Mr. Crosby smoked on that roof at some point, right?
Right, and the gun was fired within the proximity of the cigarette.
Sir, you're aware that Mr. Crosby says he smoked on that roof on July 3rd, isn't that?
He was not willing to give that information without being presented with forensic evidence.
Sir, wasn't quite my question. Mr. Crosby ultimately told you in that interview that he smoked this cigarette on July 3rd, not July 4th.
Right, when presented with evidence, the defendant said that they lied to us and that they actually did smoke that cigarette on the 3rd.
I want to talk about any other assumptions the government might have made about evidence in this case.
Okay.
So I'm gonna approach again. I'm gonna grab that bullet.
Okay,
So let's take a look at this bullet together, because this bullet, well, you told us it was found on the rooftop of the Sonesta Hotel. Do I have that right?
that's right, that's the cigarette.
Well, sir, you tested every single piece of evidence you found, right?
Right, we did.
When you tested this piece of evidence, this bullet, you didn't find any of Mr. Crosby's fingerprints on it, did you?
But no one's fingerprints.
You didn't find any of Mr. Crosby's fingerprints.
He is included in no one, yes.
You didn't find any of his skin cells, sir.
No skin cells,
None of his hair follicles.
no hair follicle.
No forensic evidence tying Mr. Crosby to this bullet whatsoever.
Just the forensic evidence on the cigarette next to it. That's right.
Sir, that cigarette, we already covered it. I'm asking about this bullet. No
Now,
forensic evidence on this bullet.
actually, no one's forensic evidence on.
All right, I'm gonna approach one more time, sir, and I'm gonna grab these documents from you. Let's talk about these tweets that you assumed were death threats in our earlier conversation. Because, sir, this document right here, it says it's Patriot Day, doesn't it?
Right, that's what Mr. Crosby posted on the 4th of July,
Sir, this tweet, it was posted on Independence Day.
4th of July.
So I want to be clear, sir, this tweet that you investigated was Mr. Crosby saying it's Patriot Day on Independence Day.
The reason we obtained that tweet is because of the previous tweet.
Sir, was that a yes to my question?
No, we did not collect that tweet simply because it was the 4th of July. It related to the tweet prior.
Sir, that wasn't quite my question, so I'll direct it back. Mr. Crosby said, it's Patriot Day on Independence Day. That was this tweet.
That's what he said.
So, sir, I want to discuss why your investigation might have included some assumptions about this case. This was your first homicide, sir, wasn't it?
Personally investigating, sure, but I oversee plenty of investigators.
Sir, this homicide, it happened to a presidential candidate under your watch, isn't that right?
That's true. I was in charge of protecting U.S. Senator.
So the first, excuse me, sir, were you finished with your answer?
I was done, yes.
Sir, that first homicide that you ever investigated, it was for someone that your Secret Service leader could not protect.
Fortunately, when you have a sniper 600 yards away, it makes it very difficult. That's true.
And you didn't want that to happen, did you, sir?
Certainly, you don't want someone who you're supposed to protect to die. Like anyone want him to.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, I've got nothing further at this time.
There redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked the agent to be excused.
Thank you.
Mr. Burnett, can I hand some of these documents back to you to publish with the journal? Appreciate it.
Anything else for you?
No, sir. Wait a second. Well, Your Honor.
All right, now, anything else from you?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the governor rests our case in chief. Let her proceed with the defense.
That's, you may begin when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Blake Crosby.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, before I proceed, is it all right if I retrieve that bullet and that cigarette from the jury?
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Sir, can you introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, my name is Blake Crosby.
Mr. Crosby, what do you do for a living?
I've been bouncing around jobs recently, but currently work as an Uber driver and a Lyft driver.
Have you ever held any other jobs besides being an Uber or Lyft driver, sir?
Yeah, before that, I was in the military,
How long were you in the military for?
8 years.
Mr. Crosby, we've heard a lot today about, well, the accusations the government has brought against you. I want to give you a chance to confront them head on. Sir, did you kill presidential candidate Thomas Capel?
No, I didn't fight in the army 8 years to kill a senator. I didn't do this.
Then I want to start by discussing where you actually were on the day of that murder. Sir, where were you on July 4th of 2022?
I was in Pennsylvania here at the rally.
What were you doing at that rally?
I was protesting.
Sir, what were you protesting about?
I disagreed with some of Senator Capel's views. He was very anti-military, as you can understand, pretty pro-military. And I wanted to protest. I didn't agree with it politically.
So, sir, you're telling us that you were at that protest that day. What did you see happen?
Senator Capello got shot. Yeah, I didn't really see it. Really, I just heard a bang and then he dropped.
Sir, what did you do after you saw that senator get shot?
You don't see stuff like that every day. With my background, it's still pretty rough. I went for a walk, trying to clear my head. It was rough.
All right, sir, so you're telling us you weren't on that rooftop that day, that you were at that protest. I want to hear from someone else about your location on July 4th. Your Honor, at this time, I'm going to be reading onto the record a portion of what's been already admitted as Exhibit 8.
Any objection?
Can I switch lines? You're being
Just this last line.
Yes, Counselor, are you gonna be asking him any questions about this, or are we just reading something?
I will, Your Honor. But I'm 100% sure I saw Crosby at the Capello rally on July 4th of 2022. Sir, I just read a statement from someone who says they saw you at that rally. Are you 100% sure you were at that rally at the time of the murder on July 4th?
Yes, I'm sure I was at the rally.
So I want to discuss why the government might have assumed that you were somewhere else instead of at that rally. Your Honor, I'm approaching the witness with arguing that in a minute as I say this up. You are, sir. Sir, do you recognize him?
Yeah, I smoked this cigarette.
When did you smoke that cigarette?
July 3rd, when I got into town.
Can you tell us where you smoked that cigarette you're holding in your hand, sir?
Sure, it was at the top of the Sonesta Hotel on the roof.
Sir, you've been here all the time,
I had,
and you heard the government say that that cigarette, it tested positive for gunshots.
I heard that.
Sir, has the government confronted you with any evidence that proves you were on that roof on July 4th at the time of the murder?
I haven't seen any video evidence, nothing like that, no.
Then I want to discuss what you told the police about that cigarette, sir, because you're telling us that you were smoking that cigarette on July 3rd. Is that what you told the investigators the first time you were asked about it?
No. That's not what I said.
What did you say?
Said it wasn't mine. I said I wasn't there.
So Crosby, why did you tell those investigators that cigarette wasn't yours?
I was scared. I was worried it made me look guilty. They were accusing me of killing a senator. I made a mistake.
And sir, I want to discuss another assumption the government might have made about your military history.
Yeah.
You told us earlier that you served in the Army. What was your job in the Army?
Oh, I was a sniper.
How much training did you have to get to become a sniper?
About a year.
Sir, the government has said today that that shot would have had to have been taken from 600 yards away. Do you believe, sitting here today, you're still capable of making that shot?
600, no. That's a hard shot. I haven't touched a rifle in a long time. I think I can hit that.
So you're telling us you haven't touched a rifle in a long time, sir, but do you own a gun?
Yes, I own a handgun.
For the record, I'm displaying Exhibit 5 to both the witness and the members of the jury. Sir, do you recognize what this bullet is?
Yeah, I think the investigators told me that's what they found on the roof.
Sir, that handgun that you mentioned you own, does it fire this kind of bullet?
No, absolutely not.
Sir, you were telling us you haven't touched a sniper rifle in years. I want to discuss how you ended up in Philadelphia. Sir, did you take any kind of flight to get to Philadelphia?
Yeah, I'm from Los Angeles, so I was following the campaign, so I took a flight and then I made my way down to Philadelphia.
Sir, when you took that flight, did you have to go through TSA first?
Yeah, like all flights.
Sir, when you went through TSA, did you bring a sniper rifle through those metal gates?
No, man, I didn't bring a sniper rifle to TSA.
And sir, when you landed in Boston, did you buy any kind of sniper rifle?
No,
Sir, have you even touched a sniper rifle in recent history?
I haven't touched a rifle in 6 years, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Crosby. Your Honor, I've got nothing further on this.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Crosby.
Good afternoon.
Sir, I want to pick up on something that Ms. Debnath asked you about on direct examination.
Okay,
Sir, you told the members of the jury that on the 4th of July, you were actually in Rittenhouse Square.
that's right. I was right in front of her.
You said you were in Rittenhouse Square to protest Senator Debnath.
That's right.
Mr. Crosby, could you tell the members of the jury a single name of a person you were protesting?
No, we didn't really exchange names. I usually don't. So I'm sorry, I can't.
Well, sir, you said you went to 4 different protests, right?
That's right.
You didn't speak to anyone at any of those protests?
Can't remember their name. I don't think I really got names. I was just passionate about the politics. So no, I'm sorry.
So you can't describe a single person that you supposedly saw at one of those rallies?
I suppose I don't know.
Sir, I'm gonna need a yes or a no for the room. Can you give us a description of a single person you saw at those protests you said you were at?
I guess not.
Then I want to talk about something you can't tell us. Because, Mr. Crosby, you have a Twitter account, don't you?
Yes, I did.
You make posts on that?
Yes, I did.
And in the months leading up to that shooting, you made a lot of posts about Senator Capello.
No, I don't think that's true.
So you're telling the members of the jury you never posted about Senator Capello before that shooting?
You asked me if I made a lot of posts. I didn't. I made just one.
Well, sir, I want to talk about those posts you made. Would you recognize a copy of one if I showed it to you today?
Probably.
Your Honor, I'm approaching the witness who's already been pre-admitted as exhibit. So this is one of those posts you made.
This was the only one about Capello.
Sir, is your testimony that's the only post you made?
No, it's the only one about Capello.
Well, Your Honor, at this time, I'm going to approach the witness who has been pre-marked as exhibit 12, another post. Sir, this is a second post you made about Senator Capello.
These are the same posts.
So this is the second post you made about Senator Capello.
No, that's not true. This isn't about Senator Capello.
Sir, are you telling us that those posts are not in reference to Senator Capello?
This one, where it says Thomas R. Capello is about Senator Capello. This one, I just say it's Patriot Day.
Well, sir, let's talk about what those posts really said. Because on exhibit 12, this one right here, it says Thomas R. Capello is a threat to every person in the country. That's what it said.
That's what I wrote.
Sir, it says as long as he is alive, none of us are safe.
That's what I wrote.
Sir, it says this is the time for patriots.
Yeah, that's right.
Sir, in that second post, you say isn't about Senator Capello. It says it's Patriot Day.
So this one was made about 2 months later. It was the 4th of July.
Oh, sir, it's really interesting that you talk about when that post was made, because this post on the 4th of July, you made it the same day that Senator Capello was shot.
Yes, unfortunately, we was shot on July 4th.
Then, sir, I want to take us back to this first, because you made it April 5th, right? 2 months before.
Yes, I did.
And, sir, I want to talk about why you ended up making it.
Okay.
Because on April 5th, that's the same day you learned about Senator Capello's campaign trip.
That's when he published it. That's right.
He announced all the locations he would be at in July.
That's right.
Do you recognize a copy of that campaign trail if I showed it to you today?
Probably, if you'd have to hand it to me.
Your Honor, I'm approaching opposing counsel, which is what marked exhibit 10. Approaching the witness with the same. Sir, this is that campaign post you saw, right?
Yeah, it looks to be the same one.
It looks to be a fair and accurate copy, nothing's changed.
Doesn't look like it.
Your Honor, at this time, we offer exhibit 10 and 10.
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 10 is received.
Sir, like I said, you saw this on April 5th.
That's right.
And then on April 5th, you made a tweet saying that Thomas R. Capello is a threat to the nation.
Yeah, they were on the same day.
Sir, I want to take a closer look at the things on this post.
Okay.
Because on July 1st, it says that Thomas Capello was going to Boston, Massachusetts.
That's right.
And you followed him there.
Right, I went to protest at all of these.
It says he, July 2nd, he went to Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yeah, it says Boston, Cambridge, Providence. I went to all of them.
So, sir, you went to Cambridge, then Providence, then Philadelphia.
That's right.
And, sir, Philadelphia, that's where Mr. Capello was shot.
Yeah, it was.
And that's when you made this tweet, saying that it's patriot.
On the 4th of July, yeah.
And, sir, I want to talk about what happened after patriot. Because you were interviewed by the FBI.
That's right.
They asked you some questions.
They did.
And you lied.
At first, when they asked about the cigarette, I didn't tell the truth. You're right.
Sir, within just first, you lied to them 3 separate times.
They asked me, and then they talked about the cigarette, and then I cleared it up when they talked about the fingerprint.
So you asked me my question, you lied 3 separate times.
I guess I talked about it 3 times, sure.
And sir, on that point, the interviewer asked you why you just lied.
That's right.
And you told them it's because you don't want to look guilty.
I was nervous. I was being investigated for an assassination. I didn't want to look guilty.
And sir, I want to talk about why you might have thought that you looked guilty. Because you've been on the Sinestro rooftop before.
Right, to smoke this cigarette.
So you know it has an unobstructed view from the top of that rooftop to Rittenhouse Square.
Sure. I know that.
Rittenhouse Square is where Mr. Capello gave his speech.
Yeah, it was.
And in that interview, you heard that Rittenhouse Square is about 600 yards from that rooftop.
That's what I heard in that interview. Yeah.
Mr. Crosby, 600 yards away. You could make that shot, couldn't you?
600, I'm not sure I could make that today. I don't think so.
Well, sure, you've made shots longer than that in the past.
But sure, years ago, when I was a sniper in the Army, I've definitely hit farther than that. Today, I don't know if I have the same skills.
So you consistently hit shots from 900.
Almost a decade ago, but yeah.
So you had the world record for the longest bullseye in the US Army.
Not world record, it was Army record. I like to think we're the best. So, I mean, hopefully world, but no. Well, yes, I hold the record.
And so when that detective, he asked, what kind of person could hit a shot from 600 yards away?
Right, it'd have to be somebody trained and consistent.
So you are trained and experienced. That's not.
Not consistent. I've been off for 6 years, but I have been trained. You're right.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Crosby. Your Honor, I've got no further questions.
For any redirection.
Yes, Your Honor. I'm gonna approach Mr. Crosby, but let's get admitted as exhibit 12. Here you are.
Thank you.
Sir, Mr. Burnett asked you about this tweet just now. I want to go through exactly what it actually says.
Yeah.
Because, sir, in this Twitter post, do you say that you want to kill that candidate?
No, no, absolutely not.
Sir, in this Twitter post, do you say you want to attack that candidate at all?
No, that's not what I said.
Sir, in this Twitter post, do you say that you're gonna use a sniper gun to kill that candidate?
No, not what I said.
So would you classify this Twitter post as a death threat, sir?
No, that's not what I intended at all. I was just talking about my politics. It definitely wasn't a threat.
Thank you, Mr. Crosby. Your Honor, I've got nothing, sir. Permission to approach and retreat?
No.
And I'll get those other exhibits ready.
Anything else from the government with this witness?
No recross, Your Honor.
Witness excuse. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Anything else from the defense?
Nothing further from the defense, Your Honor.
Okay, in what I understand to be the practices of this jurisdiction, we are going straight to closings.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, government, you may start whenever you're ready.
Your Honor. Ms. Debnath. Members of the jury. Thomas R. Capello is a threat to every person in this country. As long as Senator Capello is alive, none of us are safe. Members of the jury, this isn't just a tweet. Because when Mr. Crosby said those words, he believed them. He meant them, and he followed through. And we know. Because when you take a look at the last sentence on this tweet, he announces his plan to the world. And this is the time for patriots. Members of the jury, he tells you exactly what kind of person could fix the Thomas Capello problem. A patriot. And then on the 4th of July, the day that Mr. Capello is shot, he says it again. It's Patriot Day. So what happens? Members of the jury, the defendant, gets gets onto the rooftop of his hotel, takes aim and hits a shot that only he could make. Because he knew that the person at the end of that stage was a threat to everyone in the nation. Members of the jury, Thomas Capello is dead, and that's why we're here today. As the prosecution, we're here to hold the defendant accountable. And today we hold the burden of proof, proving beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest burden in our legal system, that two things are true. That Thomas Capello was murdered by the defendant Blake Crosby, and that he did so intentionally and deliberately. And members of the jury, when you sit back and think about the evidence, you'll start to realize how simple it is. When you think about the defendant's training, the threats the defendant made, and the timing, you'll find that there's only one person who could have took that shot. So members of the jury, let's start with the training. Because for a job like this assassination, it's not something just anyone could do. Members of the jury, the bullet that hit Mr. Capello was over 600 yards away. 90 yards up, it only took one shot to hit Mr. Capello square in the face. Members of the jury, who could make a shot like that when the defendant told you himself on cross-examination? No ordinary person could make that shot. Someone would have to be skilled, experienced, and trained to make shots. And members of the jury, the only person in the city of Philadelphia who could make a shot like that is sitting right behind me. So you might be asking yourselves, why? Why would he use his training to shoot Senator Capello? Well, members of the jury, you don't have to take a guess at what he thought of that senator. He told the entire world himself. Senator Capello was a threat. Senator Capello was not good for the United States, and as long as he is alive, nobody would be safe. So he took matters into his own hands. Which just leaves us with the timing of everything. Because it wasn't just enough for us to tell you that the defendant wanted Senator Capello dead. He told you himself. We had to prove that he was on the rooftop, that he had the opportunity to take a shot that no one else could. Today you heard about this bullet and this cigarette. And at first, when he was interviewed by the FBI, he tried to tell you, I've never seen this cigarette in my life. It wasn't me. I don't know what the Sinesta rooftop looks like until they told him about the forensic evidence they had. Then he changes his story. Oh, I might have been on the rooftop. I was there the day before. It wasn't me because I didn't want to look guilty. Members of the jury, an innocent person doesn't lie to the FBI, and certainly not someone who's been in the military. And then you've seen this bullet. And you heard from Agent DeVigo that it's a sniper round. It's a 7.62 blue NATO, and it's used by people who use sniper rifles. And you heard from the only person in the entire world who could take a shot from over 600 yards away and use that sniper rifle, someone who's familiar with this shot. The defendant. So what did you hear from the defense? Members of the jury, sure. Let's pretend for a moment their story's plausible. That he just smoked half a cigarette, left it on the rooftop. It sat on a ledge for 24 hours, didn't move. And then the very next day, the shooter gets on the roof, sets up a sniper rifle right next to that cigarette, and takes a shot. Members of the jury, that's not a coincidence. Coincidences don't stack up like that against innocent people. Members of the jury, think about the training, the threats, and the time. And when you go back to that deliberation room, find the defendant, Blake Crosby, guilty. Thank you.
You may begin when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. I'm going to take just a moment to set some exhibits on my list.
No problem.
Mr. Burnett, do we see the cigarette in that bullet anywhere? Right here. Right here. Your Honor. Mr. Burnett. Members of the jury. When they couldn't stop the assassin, they started making assumptions. Members of the jury, if there is one moment from this trial that I think sums up the government's entire case, it's when they showed this cigarette, the agent they brought to the stand today. They talked about this cigarette quite a bit, members of the jury. In fact, on cross-examination, when I was standing right here speaking to that agent, he brought it up at least 6 or 7 times without me asking. I think they were hoping that if they discussed this cigarette with you enough times, you forget that this cigarette, it's not a murder weapon. This cigarette, it's not security camera footage. This cigarette isn't an eyewitness placing Mr. Crosby at the scene of that crime. When did it occur? Members of the jury, in this court, the assumptions the government made when they couldn't stop that assassin are not good enough. See, there's a reason that the gentlemen sitting at this table have the highest burden in our legal system. Because if they get it wrong today, if we get it wrong, an innocent person could be victim. So what is that burden of proof that we keep talking about, members of the jury? Well, I want us to visualize it this way. Imagine that the government's burden beyond a reasonable doubt, it's this line right here, right in front of my feet. Well, in that case, the government's case, it starts all the way back here at the back of this floor. Now, I know this room isn't very big, members of the jury, but what that means is the government has to push the weight of the fact forward, inch by inch, with every single piece of evidence until they've convinced you that their version of what happened is the only reasonable explanation. Can they meet that burden today? The answer is no. Because of two simple things. First, the assumptions the government made. And second, why they made them. So I want to break down that first fact, members of the jury, starting with those assumptions the government made. Because Mr. Burnett, he told you about 3 things: the training, the threats, and the timing, and I want to take those one at a time. Because members of the jury, the government assumed that because of Mr. Crosby's sniper training, that he was somehow a danger to Mr. Capello. But what did we hear when Mr. Crosby took that stand? That he's not a seasoned professional. He's not what Mr. Burnett said it would require extra skill. Because we agree with the government. That 600-yard shot, it's not something anyone could do. When Mr. Crosby took that stand, he told us that he hasn't touched a sniper rifle in 6 years. That having skills like that requires consistent practice, and that he wasn't consistent. They made an assumption about his military experience to justify their case. So what's that second assumption that Mr. Burnett was telling you about? Well, he told you that Mr. Crosby was dangerous because he made threats against Mr. Capello. Well, members of the jury, I want to go through exactly what the government is calling threats today. Because they showed you these 2 tweets. This first tweet, members of the jury, is an angry tweet about Mr. Capello on Twitter. And this tweet is a tweet about July 4th, calling Independence Day Patriot Day. Members of the jury, it's not unusual for a veteran to say that it's Patriot Day on the 4th of July. So I'm going to put this one down. Let's talk about this tweet. Members of the jury, If every single person who ever posted an angry internet comment was a convict, was a murderer, we have to arrest thousands of moms who put on bad reviews on Yelp. 200 characters or less than that in a tweet is not enough to convict someone. This isn't evidence, members of the jury, it's an excuse. So let's talk about that third assumption that Mr. Burnett brought you today, the assumption that the timing proves Mr. Crosby was at the scene of this crime when it occurred. Well, members of the jury, I want to talk about the evidence they brought you, coming back to that cigarette. Because this cigarette, all that it proves is that Mr. Crosby was on that roof at some time. And that's something our client admitted himself in the statement. That he smoked this cigarette on July 3rd, a day before the attack. This cigarette doesn't say a single thing about where Mr. Crosby was on the day of the murder or where he was at the time of that attack. Members of the jury, when they couldn't find that assassin, they started making assumptions. But why is it? Why is it that the government couldn't run a thorough investigation? Why did they resort to assumptions? Well, that's where I want to think back to the conversation I had with their special agent in the secret forces. I was standing right about, and I spoke to Agent DeVico, and he told us that this investigation was his first homicide investigation. And it was his first homicide investigation into a political candidate, a presidential candidate who he couldn't protect. The fact of the matter is, this case meant a lot more to that agent than the government's letting him. When they couldn't stop that assassin, they started making assumptions. That's why at the conclusion of this trial, members of the jury, we're going to ask that you find our client not guilty. Thank you for your time.
If the government has some additional time.
Yes, Your Honor, brief rebuttal. Seven times. 7 times Ms. Debnath stood before you and told you that the government made assumptions. Well, members of the jury, we don't have to assume anything. We don't have to make assumptions about the defendant's training, because he told you himself that you need to be skilled and experienced to pull this off. We don't have to make assumptions about his background because we've got it right here. He was in the Army for 8 years as a sniper, held world records, and hit targets twice as far away as Mr. Capella. We don't have to make assumptions about the DNA evidence because it was sitting right on that table. A cigarette with only one person's DNA on it, a 1 and 6.2 billion% match. Members of the jury, the only person making an assumption in today's case is the defense. Because they want to assume that we're choosing to pick a target when we've got the evidence right in front of them. They want to assume that Agent DeVico is making an assumption because he's sad and he did his job wrong. Members of the jury, his job was to investigate. And all the evidence he's brought before you, well, it's sitting on every one of these tables. Evidence like this isn't an assumption. Evidence like this doesn't stack up against an innocent person, so you need to do what the evidence does. Think back to the training, the threats, and the time. And you'll see that it all points to a single person. Hold them accountable and find them guilty. Thank you.
My understanding is that we are supposed to set our ballots and then wait for the all clear before doing comments.